Hey, I'm Keith, and today I'm tackling this mudroom renovation. Now, this is the renovation. Before, there were two walls that came in here with a pocket door, everything was enclosed and nothing was open, but now we've opened this all up right to the ceiling, new lighting, much more functional for a family of four with individualized lockers. We have storage above with soft closed doors, storage below for shoes, also with soft close. Now there were a lot of obstacles along the way, including all the wires hanging when we took these walls down. The ceiling needed to be leveled, so there was drywall work. We also had to patch in some hardwood flooring and refinish the floor to match the existing. And with other delays, such as picking paint colors and hardware and design decisions, this was definitely a longer timeline than I like to work in. It took about 7-8 months from the second I started demo till the last door handle was put on. So stick around and I'll show you how I did it. All right, first up, let's protect the floor with some ram board, because I'm about to make a mess. And once the floors and railings were protected from my impending destruction, then I could remove the existing hardware and then start taking off all the molding. Oh man, I hate demo. Once I got that front wall taken down, that's when I really opened up some fun, because the existing built-in was made of 3/4 inch plywood glued to 3/4 inch MDF with the vertical shiplap, so that makes for quite the heavy panel. And then, like a coal miner, but not really like a coal miner, using just a hanging light, I worked deep into the night to remove the rest of the existing built-in. So here, after a day and a half, is everything that came out of that little mudroom. So with that in my rear view, here is what the new mudroom is going to look like. We're going to have horizontal shiplap. We're going to have 2 drawers on the bottom with a toe kick coming in at a 45-degree angle. Picked up that little tip from Matt Moore Designs. This doesn't show the baseboard. We thought about doing horizontal shiplap underneath the cubbies, but we're going to end up eliminating that. And then it was back to the shop where I could start ripping down some 3/4 inch maple plywood and start building my boxes. I'm using the track saw to do this, as you can see, so I will be starting on the lower cabinet assembly that has the 2 open ends and then the 2 drawers in the middle. So I'll work on the carcass construction for that. And I'll tell you right now, I screwed up here. I got a little ahead of myself and decided I could probably build this as one big piece and install it as one large unit, and didn't really leave myself room for scribing to the floor, which was extremely out. So anyway, we'll leave that to the install. But in the meantime, that will not take away from all the fun of cutting down plywood on the track saw and table saw. I also ripped down some 3.5 or 4 inch wide strips and then cut them to length at the miter saw. These will be used for my little toe kick assembly for that middle bottom section that has 2 drawers in it. So with my pieces cut, I could do a little assembly here. And I'm not gonna lie, after doing that giant 15-foot built-in in my last video with my buddy Kevin and seeing how he makes his toe kicks, the way I do it is super inefficient, and I will be using his method from now on. If you missed that, be sure to go check it out. That was a really cool project. And with the majority of that center section base done, I could cut my little 45-degree returns and then screw those down. I'll also be adding a continuous support stretcher along the front and back of this bottom cabinet assembly. So I set my dado stack to the thickness of my plywood, and then using a sled, I cut out those notches. And now you can see this section start to come to life and die. But at least we can laugh about it. But with the plywood resurrected, we're able to screw these parts together, get our end panels in place, flip it around, get our other end panels screwed together, and then move on to cutting a dado in the backs of our other end panels. And with the grooves cut, I could start some assembly. So I put the back in, screw it down, screw it to the inner end panel. Is that an oxymoron? Inner end panel? And then screw in my top supports. Oh! Looks like Shopcat Jerry is taking another one of his naps. So with that front stretcher installed, I can screw in the back, and you can see our box thing starting to come together. And now look who stopped by to interrupt me. It's Shopcat Lola. I don't think you want any of that. That was a good long sniff, though. And she doesn't run from much, but when she hears that compressed air, woohoo, watch out. And I don't know why I grabbed this Gorilla Glue. I really don't like it. It's super thick and just weird. I don't know, but I figure I may as well use it since I bought it. Oh yeah, slather it on there like syrup on your pancakes. And you may be wondering what this is even for. This will actually be our center divider between our two drawers. I want it wide enough so that when I put my face frame on there, I don't have to build out my drawer slides. I also drop in a couple 2, 3, or 10 screws in there just to secure everything. And then we can slide it in place. I want to make sure this opening is perfectly square, so I use a couple of clamping squares in place, double check all my measurements, and secure it with some screws. Oh gosh, more plywood. It never ends. Actually, we're just getting started with the plywood here. So now I'm ripping down strips to kind of cover up a mistake I made. So this will be for a web frame top that will give me a double thick top. Oh, and that sneeze was dedicated to my buddy Bourbon Moth, so that my top can sit on top of that and the face frame won't hang down too low. Yeah, it's kind of convoluted, so let's just revisit that later. And with that pocket screwed together, I also want to call your attention to my back nailers, which have been pocket screwed in place so I can secure everything to the wall. And now I could rip some more plywood. This will be for our upper lockers. I'm ripping this to about 11¼ of an inch wide. Once I put my face frame on there, it'll give me about 12 inches of depth, setting up a stop block at my miter saw to cut them all to the same length, which I will do now. So I'm cutting enough material for the vertical sides of my lockers as well as the tops. Then I stack them all up neatly off to the side, where I'll have to move them again in a minute. To the bench they go for inspection by Jerry. Hey, buddy. And after a hard brainstorming session, Jerry and I realized that I needed to do something else first. And that was to glue up the double thick shelves that would make up our cubbies up above. So change of shirt, a different day, and I'm back to my favorite glue, Titebond 3. You can see I already have some double thick shelves being clamped into sandwiches. So let's make another one. And one more clamp ought to do it. Once those were dry, I could rip them down to their final depth, width, to match the sides of the lockers. Do this at the table saw. I also cut them to their correct length at the table saw using my crosscut sled. All right, ideally this would be done flat on the bench, but I don't really have the room, so I'm going to do this as awkwardly as possible, standing up. So what I have here is clamped 2 pieces of plywood, one that represents the double thickness of plywood that I need over here, and this piece represents where this needs to stop. That way I know once I hit that, that's all I gotta go, and I can screw in this end piece. So these are my shelves, which are 20 3/16. Now I did all the math, but I can tell you right now, the math says yes, but the wood says no. It just doesn't always work when you take measurements. So I'm gonna put this in here as my spacer. All right, fast forward. Got a clamping square here to make sure this is square. I got my shelf in here, that's clamped. It's clamped across the back to keep that nice and tight. What? Never seen this move before? Oh yeah. Now it's starting to take shape. Now unfortunately my upper cabinets, total boat baby, I could not get pre-finished plywood, so I am pre-finishing it myself with some Total Boat Baby Halcyon Clear, and I didn't feel like spraying, so I'm gonna roll this on a couple of coats, and it rolls pretty nicely, I have to say. I ended up putting 3 coats on there, and when that was dry, I could start breaking down the plywood for the upper cabinets, ripping them to width on the table saw, cutting them to length. Also on the table saw, my crosscut sled again, and then a little assembly. Basically building boxes here. I used some spacers on the sides to make sure that my top was in the correct position. And as you can see, the sides go higher. That's because I'm going to have a cross rail going all the way across the top and then crown molding on top of that. Now to install the shelves for the cubbies, I'm using the Lamella. You've seen me use it before, but I'm using the DeVario P18 connectors. Now this is a multi-step process. The first is to cut a stop groove on both sides of your shelf. You do not want that groove coming through the front of the shelf to be seen. Once those are cut, you change your machine to the 18 setting. Lock that in, cut a couple of slots on both sides, and then you want to grab the female part of the connector with the insertion tool. Lock that in, and then it slides in the slot. You bang it and it stays, just like that. And then using your template guide that has 2 pins on the back, you mark your holes, and using the drill bit with the stop collar, you drill all your holes, and then you take the male connector that looks like this, and then hammer those in. And once those are in, you can slide yourself all the way in. Once it gets past that first connector, you're home free, and then you just bang it in till it's nice and flush. Now, the reason that system works is if you can't get screws in the side, so it's good for pre-finished shelves, wine racks, things like that. And then I could put the backs on my cabinets and get that mocked up and into place, clamp it down so it doesn't fall on my head, and then I pulled the whole thing down. And then I could work on getting the bench seat in position and a confessional. Well, this is a little embarrassing because I completely forgot to turn on the camera when I was cutting and fitting all the parts for my face frame of the bottom bench. But as you can see, I have all my rails and stiles in place, as well as on the top bench, I have my hardwood edging in place. Now, none of these are attached permanently. I use the lamello connectors as well as some dominoes, and everything is loosely in place and will be fit and permanently attached when I do the install. Now, my outer stiles, which will meet the wall, those are cut longer so I can scribe those to the wall in case there are any inconsistencies. Hey guys, real quick, I wanted to tell you about my new online woodworking course where you can build this walnut console table along with me at your own pace. And yes, even Jerry is included in the course. I'll guide you through the whole build process from milling and marking all the way up to the final finish. We'll cover all kinds of joinery, from angled bridle joints to building drawers with rabbets pinned with copper, stop dados, mortise and tenons, tapered legs, and mitered case construction. The list goes on and on. So if this is something you're interested in, I'm gonna leave a link below where you can go and check out the website and sign up for the course. But if you're not quite ready yet, I also have a 3-part free video series that you can sign up for, which I go into some common woodworking mistakes, as well as some tips and tricks that you may never have heard of. All right, back to the mudroom. To make sure my upper lockers line up perfectly where I want them, I'm popping a couple dominoes in there just for position, so when I drop my lockers on, I know they're dead nuts where they need to be. Just like so. I just want to quickly point out these mystery connectors. These are lamello Clamex that will allow me to connect these 2 locker sections together without any screws. I just turn the cam clamp and they're tight. This will come in super handy on install day. Now, the backs of the upper lockers are going to be faux horizontal shiplap, meaning I'm just taking a giant sheet of MDF and cutting grooves in there to simulate shiplap. Now, you can't just cut grooves at any measurement because they need to be spaced evenly within the height of the locker. So after some measurements and a little math, I came up with this little template here, and then I just used that to space all my grooves in both of my large panels. And this kind of took a while, so I'm not going to bore you with that. And I wanted to get all these upper cabinets and lockers primed before I installed them, so I'm using this Benjamin Moore Aqua Lock. Now at this point, my sister hadn't picked out the color for everything yet, so I just had the primer tinted to a neutral gray and got all that rolled on. So I did the face frame, the insides of all the lockers and cabinets, the shiplap back, and then I could start doing a little more assembly. Before dropping on the shiplap back, to ensure that that middle divider doesn't go one way or the other, I'm just using some spacer blocks to make sure everything stays in position, and then I could drop on that heavy MDF back. And with Lola playing watchdog, I was able to screw everything down, but she looked a little uncomfortable, so I gave her a little shuka and some Kaizen foam to sit on, and she looked much happier. All right, let's go vlog style. As you can see, things are looking a little bit different in here. We got all that wire and spaghetti buttoned up into the wall. We got everything patched and drywalled and primed. Now we're ready to start installation. But first, back here, I need to patch some flooring. So we have some areas here where we took out the old wall that we need to patch with flooring. And then we can start installing our base layer and work our way up. I grabbed the cordless circ saw to make a rip cut down and kind of pry out all those old pieces so I can get some long flooring in the way. But you know what the problem is? You can't just buy a couple of pieces of white oak hardwood flooring, so I'm gonna have to make my own on this one. And to do that, let's head back to the shop where I'll rip down some white oak I had, luckily, in my lumber rack. And to match the existing tongue and groove profile, I'm using a beading bit on the router table. I'll do the first pass, which will give me this. And then I'll flip it and run it through on the other side. And I will end up with something that looks like this. And then I make 2 more exactly like it. And to cut the groove on the other side, I'm at the router table just using a grooving bit or a slot cutting bit to make that. And then I needed to cut some grooves in the bottom of each plank. And to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what these are for. There seems to be some debate on the topic, whether it's for airflow or so that the boards will sit flatter on an uneven floor, or that when you nail into the tongue, there's a space for the splinters to go. I don't really know. So if you have a theory, let me know in the comments below. And with those cut, I could go back and install them. And as you'll notice, I'm not putting the moisture barrier back in, or in this case, they use tar paper. This is also a debated topic. There's a conditioned space underneath, so it's really not necessary. And then I could sand everything flush. And as you can see, I also sanded all the old stain off in the middle of the floor. Now it was time for install. For this, I had my buddy Kevin from Pine Point over to help me out. So to cut the top, we actually put a template in place using strips of melamine, taped them together, and then put it on our top. And I totally forgot to film that, so I apologize. But before I drop that in place, I want to point out to you how I mentioned way back that I didn't make this bottom cabinet for scribing. You can see the gap back there on the floor, which I will come back and put a little clamshell molding around there. But to be honest, in the end, I actually like the look of it better with the molding. Okay, fast forward here. Now you might be wondering, how in the heck is the face frame on and now you have a primed top and I see the cabinet there in the back? Well, here's the thing. This project took place over a period of 7 or 8 months. Why, you might ask? Well, there was a lot of back and forth and hemming and hawing on final design and dimensions and paint colors, and then waiting on the drywall and electrical work and hardware choices and drawer slides to come in. So the project manifested itself in a very unusual and inefficient way to get to the finish line. So I also missed filming some things, I lost more hair, etc. But not everything goes smoothly. Not everything goes in a straight line from A to B. And this is a prime example of that. It was time to install the lockers, which I really had all the utmost confidence I could do this myself, but I could lift it, but trying to get it up and onto the bench. So I employed the help of my brother-in-law, and it was easy as pie. Dropped it up there and slid it into place. Then I secured those dividers with some screws. I'm using a square here to make sure the front end of that doesn't go out of square. With that secured, I'll do the end and then the middle panel as well. And then, as I mentioned way back in the shop, I'm using these Clamex connectors to join the two sections in the middle. Then we could drag the second one in. Well, me, but I did need my brother-in-law again to help me hoist it in place. And then with the turn of an Allen key, those two units come together nice and tight. No screws needed. And then I could get the upper cabinets installed. As you can see, I have some green tape masking the edge of these. That's because after it was all assembled, I decided to put another clear coat of the Total Boat Halcyon on there. So I sprayed it in there and just masked off the edge because I'm going to need that fresh for glue. And with that right side secured, I could pop in the left and then secure that down as well with some screws. Now, my original intention with this upper face frame was to cut all my pieces, scribe my ends, then pocket screw the entire assembly together, prime it, and paint it so it was completely pre-finished, so I could just come back, use the lamello, and snap the whole thing in place. Because painting a face frame, priming, and multiple coats of paint is just a pain. However, because of its size, I wasn't able to transport it when it was fully assembled and painted, so I had to kind of piecemeal it, put it together on site, and then snap it on. So now you might be saying, well, if you were going to do that, why didn't you just put them up and nail it and fill the holes instead of going through all of this? And that is a valid point, my friends. However, I really wanted to test the limits of this machine and check its accuracy. So what I'm doing here is setting up to scribe my end styles. You can see I have 2 sets of parallel slots along the back of my face frame piece. Now these slots are offset by 9/16 of an inch, so I can use the outer set of slots to put it up on the cabinet carcass, and then using these mag shims and a marking knife at 9/16 of an inch, I can scribe all the way down, go to the table saw, scribe almost to my line, clean up with a block plane, and then move my connectors over into the inner set of slots, and it's perfectly scribed to the wall. I repeated the same process with the long outer style on the left-hand side, and then I could just start measuring and piecing in the rest of my rail and style components, while cutting all the slots in my carcasses as well as in the face frames. And those little black lamello biscuits I'm using are called Biscos. They're perfect for dry fitting everything. And then I broke out the trusty pocket hole jig so I could join all these face frame components together. And like a true professional, I screwed it all together on the playroom floor. And then I could set up for installing the whole unit, installing the male and female parts of the Tenso P14 connectors, starting first with my carcass cabinets, and then moving on to my face frame itself. Here's what the male connector looks like. Now they also make these preload clips which you can snap in, and it will pre-open the fingers on that male part, because when you're trying to line up this many connectors at once, if you're off just a little bit, some of those fingers may get misaligned and give you trouble. And with all my connectors installed in their slots, I could apply some glue on the carcass, and then it was the moment of truth. Was I worried? Yes. Yes, I was. Which is why I chose to celebrate like some drunken lunatic at a buzzer beater. But then the bottom face frame could also be installed just using some Clamex connectors. No nails here. I used caulking because I couldn't find the glue. Works just as well. Wipe the squeeze out away. And then the same thing on the front nosing of the seat.
Hi, Doodle Floodle.
And then my niece decided to stop in for a visit. And I figured this was as good a time as any to build the doors and drawers in this non-chronological build. So I'm using 7/8 hard maple, which is what I used for the face frame on the lockers, etc. as well. So I'm just ripping down all my rails and stiles to 2 inches wide, and then I'm cutting a 3/8 groove down the middle of all these pieces as well, which will accept the center MDF panel. I use a stop block at the miter saw to ensure all my parts are cut the same length. And then back over to the table saw using my small part sled and a stop block. I can cut all the tongues for the tongue and groove. I'm using a dado stack for this as well. There you go. It's a tongue and a groove. And then I line them all up. Then I could cut the rabbets in the backs of all my MDF panels, like so. And I actually like to round over the corners on these to just make them sliding into those grooves when you're assembling them a little bit easier. And then it was time to glue everything up. So with some glue in all the joints, brush it around, and I could slide that panel in. Nice little visit from Lola. And I could put it in the clamps, and I just use a chisel here to move that panel around so it's perfectly centered. I have nice reveals on the inside. And I do the same with all the other doors and the drawer fronts as well. And since I was feeling kind of lazy and in the neighborhood anyway, I stopped by my buddy Alex's shop at Owlhead Woodco to employ the use of his drum sander to sand all these joints nice and smooth front and back. Oh, what a delight. I gotta get one of these things. Now, since my upper cabinet openings weren't exactly square, I kind of had to scribe them to fit. So I put them in the opening using spacer blocks all the way around to give me a 3/30 seconds gap. I made my marks, and then on the table saw using the L fence, I'm just using some double-sided tape to stick down an edge guide here that will ride along that L fence and give me a perfect cut right on my marks. Then with my new F1 certified trim router, I buzzed a 16th round over on all the edges, cleaned it up by hand with some sandpaper, and then primed them all. And while those were drying, I needed to scribe the crown molding to the ceiling. And from one end to the other, the ceiling was off 3/4 of an inch. So I actually had to build up a piece of maple on top of the crown. And I'm using solid crown. If you don't know what that is, here's a picture of it. It's not like a typical crown molding. There's a solid backing. So after I scribe to the ceiling, look at this scribe line. But once this is all painted, and since it sits so high, it's 8.5, 9 feet in the air, you never see it. Your eye isn't drawn to it. So at the table saw, I make the scribe cut. I have that blade beveled at about 10 degrees to back cut it. I cleaned it up with the block plane, and then I could do the install. I needed to use a block with a little mallet just to persuade it into place. But once I did, I was very happy with the fit, and I could tack it into place with some nails. And I filled those nail holes, and I could get to priming everything. And the one last piece of trim I needed to do was this little piece of clamshell molding, which will go in the cubbies on the left hand and right side down near the floor to hide that big gap when we did the install. So a little caulk, little coat, and I got some wax paper on the floor, which will allow me to paint this in place and not get paint all over the hardwood floors. And then I could just slide that out after I paint. And then it was time to paint. I'm using Benjamin Moore Scuffex HC163 Duxbury Gray, which really should be called Duxbury Green. I don't know why they call it gray. But once that was all done, and I actually sprayed the doors and drawer fronts, and I could put the hinges on all the doors using this Craig jig, which I like to use a lot. Super handy, especially for a small number of doors. Then I could drill all the holes for the Bloom Inserta hinges. I love these things. You just pop them in and snap it. No screws necessary. Soft close, of course. Then I could install the Bloom clips for the undermount drawer slides. And then using my Owlhead Woodco medallion template, I route out a groove to put my little wooden medallion logo in. This is a great way to add a nice personalized signature touch to your work. You use a pattern bit, the WM3000 by Bits and Bits. Routes out a little groove perfectly. Some glue, and then you can drop your logo medallion in there. Now you can order this medallion maker pattern from Owlhead Woodco, and he will laser cut you your logo medallions as well. I'll be sure to leave information in the description below. Now I also wanted to make some custom door stops for the doors that sit above the cubbies. So I'm just using some maple here, and I'm cutting a groove kind of in the front of it, which will take into account the rubber bumpers that are going on the back of the doors. That way when the doors close, they bump, stop, and are still flush with the face frame. I also drill some countersink holes for mounting, and then I just spray it with some spray lacquer. Quick and easy. Now to get my door stops in perfect position, I'm using a little bit of green tape and some CA glue to stick that perfectly where I need it so it doesn't move. Then I could pre-drill some holes for some screws, and just to make sure it didn't move, I clamped it down and screwed it home. And no, I did not remove the green tape behind there because, hey, why bother? And then with a few screws, my Bloom undermount slides were installed, and I could put the drawer in and lock that in place and then get to work on the drawer fronts. Now, there seems to be a bone of contention with this method of hanging drawer fronts. I'm using these Bloom drawer front adjusters. They're made of nylon, and this right here is the metal marking template, which is a tight fit, so I remove it with a magnet. So what you do is I set my 3/32 spacers on the bottom and on the side, give the drawer front a tap, which will leave an indent in the drawer front, or rather the drawer box, as you can see here and here, up close. And that's where I drill my hole, which will allow me to feed my screw back through and then into the nylon adjuster that is in the drawer front. And here's what the nylon adjuster looks like. You just hammer those into the drawer front itself. Just make sure it's flush with the back of your drawer front, otherwise it will sit proud of your drawer box when mounted. And then I could get the screws threaded through and attached. And the great thing about these nylon adjusters is it gives you 5 millimeters of adjustment in all directions, allowing you to set that drawer front perfectly in your opening with perfect reveals. We'll attach it permanently with screws from the inside later, but first we need to work on the floors. Now the existing floors were done with a 50-50 mix of Jacobine and ebony of the Minwax, and oh boy did I screw up here, folks. So as you can see, I'm staining everything, and I guess you could debate whether I should have done this first and then installed, but in my mind I was like, I don't want to ruin brand new stain and poly floors and then put a built-in in, but in retrospect I probably should have done this first. In any event, the problem here is once I wiped all the stain off, it did not match the existing flooring at all. It was much, much lighter. And I went into major, and I mean major, panic mode. So I reached out on Instagram to John Feliciano from J&S Wood Floors, and his first question was, did you water pop the floor? And I said, no. And he said, well, you've made a mistake, young man. You've got to sand it back to bare wood, water pop it, and restain it. And after I went through every possible stage of denial, I did just that. I'm not going to show you that, but sanded everything down to bare wood, water popped it, restained it, applied some poly, and as you can see, so much better. Almost an exact match. And this is why I don't stain, people. It's hard wax oil for me, but huge thanks again to John Feliciano. So before I could permanently attach the drawer fronts and hang the doors, I needed to install the hardware. And I love how the brass complements this green or gray paint color quite nicely. So first I needed to route out a recess in the top of the drawer fronts. To do that, I'm putting a couple of scrap pieces on each side to make sure my router doesn't tip. And then just using that same bit that I used to put my logo medallion in, the WM3000 by Bits and Bits, this little pattern bit, I'm just hogging out the majority of the material. And then I can come back in and clean it with a chisel, and then install my hardware. Now, these are coming with brass screws. If you've ever used brass screws, they're very soft. So I'm pre-threading the holes with a regular steel screw and then coming back and installing the brass screws with a little bit of wax to help them go in. Now, you may have noticed that I installed the handle over raw wood that we just routed out, but I did go back and paint all that to seal all that up and then reinstalled the handle. And these slotted screws are the pits. And then it was the same process for the pulls on the doors, a little route, a little chisel, etc. And then I could hang the hooks. I used the laser to give me a nice level line all the way across. That way I don't have to do any measurements. Then I could pre-drill and hang. These hooks are for rejuvenation, as is all the other hardware. The main hooks in the back are these double hooks. And then on the sides of each locker wall, there's a single hook. Now to install the toe kick, I may be stepping on a few toes here. I don't know. I'm actually using the old masking tape and CA glue trick rather than putting any nails. I think this is going to be more than strong enough to hold this up forever, and if it falls down for some reason, then I'll come back with some construction adhesive or something. I just didn't want to put any nails in there and have to fill those holes because it is kind of visible. And then I could attach the drawer fronts, and the drawer pulls back on after I painted under there. And with the drawer reveals adjusted and looking good, I could permanently attach the fronts with some screws from the inside. And then install the hinges, so that's just a matter of popping them in, snapping that down, and then installing the pulls. And as you can see, I used a little CA glue on these screws just because you're only using one screw on that. I really wish there were two. And then I could hang the doors, put the little bumpers on there, and then I'll show you the next problem. These are 110-degree hinges, so they hit the wall. Now you might be saying, Keith, why don't you just buy the 90-degree? Well, even with the 90-degree, the way that those door pulls stick out, it would hit the wall. So enter the Bloom 86-degree restriction clips that are a real kind of pain to put in, but they pop right in the back of the hinge like so. And I'm sure some of you are saying, well, why don't you just be more careful when you open the door? Well, sometimes you get a little forgetful and it slams into the wall and dents it or damages the hardware. So this eliminates all of that. And it also eliminates the two middle doors from pulling a Laverne and Shirley. See what I mean? And then I could pull up all the protective flooring, etc., and be bamboozled by my niece yet again. What is so funny? And now for the big-ish reveal. As you walk up the steps from the garage, this is what you now see versus what you saw before this whole project began. Now this project definitely had an irregular timeline with an erratic sequence of events, but in the end, my sister and the family were very happy with the way it came out and couldn't wait to put it to use. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.